3 months after that Tuesday, I stood under a chandelier the size of a small car. I watched my own wife hurl her banquet invitation at me. She threw it hard. The paper slapped my collar and tumbled to the marble floor. She walked past me as if I had never mattered to her at all. She was sure I had begged some connection to sneak inside the event. My wife had no clue that the host had already tried to reach me many times that morning. The man hosting the entire evening had emptied 3 phones trying to find me. He was desperate to speak with me before the event began. The moment she disappeared down the stairs, the host stepped off his stage. President Song of the Song Group crossed the floor in front of 200 guests. He stopped in front of my classmate's arrogant cousin. Then, he slapped the man hard enough to shift his jaw. President Song then turned to me and dipped his head in respect. He called me his uncle in front of everyone. 200 faces stopped knowing where to look. The room went silent as the billionaire bowed to my shadow. To understand how a woman I loved could look at me like garbage, we walked back 3 months. We returned to a rusted classroom in the south of the city. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. That single number cracked my life clean in two. My name is Xiao Yang. Until that afternoon, I was the quietest kid in the back row. My parents had vanished from my life when I was very small. Nobody in the neighborhood knew where they went. The aunts and uncles who used to visit stopped coming after the 2nd year. By the time I turned 17, my relatives only spoke my name with a sigh. They acted like they were reminding themselves of an old bill they still owed. I was a burden to everyone I knew. 2,000 yuan a month kept me alive. This money was sent to my card by the woman I was legally married to. Yes, I was married. That part of the story tangled itself before it even started. 2 years earlier, an old promise between our families had put our names onto the same paper. She had not asked for this arrangement. Neither had I, but she honored the paper and paid my rent. She also covered my school fees. Every time she glanced at me, her eyes spoke for her. She was at the top of the college teaching staff at only 24. She felt she deserved a husband with a spine and a bank balance. That Tuesday, my old phone buzzed against my thigh during a lesson. I slipped the phone out under the desk. The message was from my bank, and it was very short. A deposit had come in from a private account overseas. My thumb froze halfway to the screen. 9 zeros lined up in a row like soldiers. 1 billion yuan was now in my account. This was not 1 billion won. It was 1 billion yuan. For a slow second, I was sure the bank had made a mistake. I thought some scam had learned my phone number. A second message dropped in a heartbeat later. It was a short note from the sender in a font that looked like my mother's handwriting. She said she was sorry for being gone so long. She also said a man was watching me from a distance. This money was the smallest apology she could send to me. She promised she would call one day, but not yet. My mouth went dry as I read the words. My ears filled with white noise that the teacher's voice could not push through. Around me, students scribbled in their notebooks and complained about a test on Friday. Nobody noticed the boy in the back row holding a phone under his desk. I was staring at more money than the entire district had earned in a decade. Then, Shu Lingling stood up and screamed. She shouted that someone had stolen the class fund. Lingling was the kind of girl the school treated like a goddess. Her father owned a construction firm 3 provinces wide. Her uncle sat on the school board. She wore a new watch every semester and made sure everyone saw them. Since the first day, she had been our class monitor. She kept the class fund envelope in her own drawer because no adult ever told her no. Her scream shot across the room. 12,000 yuan was gone. Lingling waved the empty envelope over her head as if she were showing off a wound. The room went silent. Chairs scraped on the floor as students turned to look. Somebody at the front laughed nervously and then stopped. The homeroom teacher, who was also my wife, walked in a moment later. She asked what the noise was about. Lingling did not hesitate for even a single breath. Her eyes turned toward the back row and settled on me. She told our teacher that only one student had a reason to touch that money. Lingling said only one student lived off handouts. She claimed I had been sitting near her desk during the break. Fingers followed her voice as half the class turned in their seats. Heat climbed into my face. I tried to keep my expression blank. My phone was still warm in my pocket and glowing with a 9-0 balance. Nobody in that room would have believed the truth. Lingling always spoke my name with contempt. Her boyfriend, Jiang Yung, was already smirking at me from across the aisle. He was waiting for the moment he could join the attack. Liani looked at me with the eyes she used for everything she found disappointing. She was slow and tired. She was already convinced of my guilt. She asked me to stand up. My chair squealed on the floor. The whole class heard the sound. She told me to place my bag on her desk. Obeying was easier than fighting for now. My throat felt like sandpaper as I watched her open the zipper. Inside the front pocket sat a small brown envelope. I had picked it up at the bank on my way to school. There were 50,000 yuan in fresh notes inside. This was a withdrawal from a separate savings account. My grandmother had left that account for me before she passed away. 50,000 was more money than I had ever held in one place. My plan had been simple. I wanted to buy Liani a pearl bracelet. I wanted to give her a first gift that felt normal. Liani lifted the envelope out with 2 fingers. She stared at the money like a judge staring at a signed confession. Ling Ling squealed with delight at the sight. She told the class this was the coward move she expected from me. She said my kind never learned. Ling Ling demanded the police and my expulsion. She wanted me marched out through the front gate for everyone to watch. I opened my mouth to explain the truth. My words came out flat and almost pleading. I told my wife the money belonged to me from an old account. I said the withdrawal slip was in the side pocket. I only needed 60 seconds for her to check the bag. She did not give me that time. She did not even lift her eyes from the notes in her hand. Her voice was tight as she told me I had shamed the class. She ordered me out of the building until the police arrived. The word police cracked something inside my chest. However, my face stayed still. My mother's message was still glowing in my other pocket. I had 1 billion yuan. This was a weapon nobody at this school had the imagination to picture. Liani opened the classroom door and pointed me through it. My cheeks burned as I picked up my bag. Ling Ling gave me a mocking wave as I passed her seat. Jiang Yong laughed low in his throat. The corridor outside was empty. The door closed behind me with a soft and awful click. I stood there for a long moment with my hand on the bag strap. A bell was going to ring in 10 minutes. Every classroom was going to empty into this corridor. Students would see me standing there like a thief on trial. I decided not to be there when the bell rang. This felt like the first real decision I had made in years. The withdrawal slip was still tucked in my bag. Liani had not wanted to see it. That was the part that hurt me the most. It was not that Ling Ling had lied to the teacher. Snakes bite because that is what they do. It was that my wife had believed the lie instantly. She believed the accusation before I had even finished breathing. My legs carried me to a convenience store window at street level. My own reflection caught me by surprise. I saw the same cheap uniform and bad haircut. The phone in my pocket now weighed differently. Something in the reflection had shifted a fraction. Only I could see the change. A decision waited in front of me. I could take the billion and vanish. I could buy a plane ticket and change my name. I could start again somewhere warm where nobody remembered me. Or I could stay. I could let the people who ignored me finally learn the truth. My grandmother had a saying about a man's spine. She said it is measured by whether a man stands when he is poor. My spine had never fully straightened. Not until the weight in my pocket changed everything. My legs were steadier than my thoughts as I stepped back from the window. The map on my phone showed the fanciest real estate office nearby. It was 6 blocks east, above a coffee chain. My feet turned that way. The office was made of glass and pale wood. It was designed to make people feel out of place. A woman at the front desk looked at me. She priced me at a glance based on my shoes and uniform. She went back to her nails without saying a word. I looked at the property listings on the wall. I saw a penthouse in the riverfront tower. It had 3 floors and a private lift. The price was 7,500,000 yuan. The tag said the seller wanted cash only for a quick close. I told the receptionist I was interested in the penthouse. She did not look up from her desk. She told me to wait in the corner until someone was free. The chair was cold. A young man in a beige coat sat on the sofa across the room. He had his arm around a girl in a fur collar. His laughter was loud on purpose. He repeatedly mentioned the riverfront listing to impress the girl. He looked like a man who bought love in installments. Eventually, he noticed me and laughed. He asked the receptionist if they were letting street kids inside for the air conditioning. The receptionist gave him a polite and apologetic smile. An agent finally came out with a headset around her neck. She walked straight past me to the man in the beige coat. She called him Mr. Chang. She asked him if he had brought the deposit for the riverfront unit. Joe Chang leaned back in his seat. He said the 7,500,000 yuan felt a little steep. He was sure the seller would come down on the price. The agent's face tightened for a heartbeat. Then she said she would speak to the seller. I rose from my chair as my knees felt light. The receptionist finally looked at me. She asked if I was lost or if a parent was nearby. I told her I wanted the riverfront penthouse. I would pay the full price in cash today. The lobby seemed to swallow the words for a second. Joe Chang laughed first. It was a short and startled bark. Then he let out a longer and meaner laugh. He told his girlfriend the kid was worth watching. He promised her the show would be over in 3 minutes. He asked the receptionist to keep the poor thing entertained. The agent with the headset walked over to me slowly. She approached me the way people approach a small dog they suspect might bite. She asked if I understood how much money I had just named. She asked if I had any idea what 7.5 million yuan looked like on paper. Her smile was patient. It was the kind adults use when they have already decided to laugh at someone later. I took the black card out of the inside pocket of my school jacket. It was a private card. The message from my mother told me to expect it in the post. It had arrived that morning in a plain envelope with no stamp. Someone slipped it under the door of my dorm before dawn. I had not planned to use it this fast. I placed it face down on the reception counter. Then I slid it across to her. She flipped the card over. Her smile locked and her lips went pale. Her fingers actually shook once before she caught them. The agent recognized the card. She did not recognize the design, but she knew the color. It was the color of the metal. Only 3 banks in the city issued that kind of card. All 3 required a minimum deposit of 100 million yuan. Her eyes rose from the card to my uniform and back to the card. Her whole face rearranged itself. Joe Chang had not stopped smirking. He called across the lobby to ask what the delay was. He was still grinning as he spoke to the agent. He suggested that if the kid wanted to play Billionaire, they should give him a model. He said they should give him a plastic model of the building to hold. The agent did not answer him. She was staring at me the way a cat stares at a new smell. She asked in a very careful voice if I would prefer to go upstairs. She suggested a private suite to complete the purchase. A new word for me had crept into her mouth. She addressed me as Sir. The smirk of Joe Chang died then. His face did the small and mean twitch of a man who lost the joke. He realized the joke had moved without his permission. I told her that upstairs would be fine. However, the deal needed to close within the hour. A birthday banquet was waiting for me that evening. I did not want the paperwork hanging over my night. The speed of her nod made her earring bounce. Joe Chang shot up from his seat. His voice climbed toward a shout. He told the receptionist he had been in this office first. He said he had been discussing this exact unit. He claimed his family would be very displeased if the unit went to a school kid. The girl on his arm pulled her hand back. She stepped one clear step behind him. She had already read the room. Her handbag came up over her shoulder like a shield. The agent turned back to Joe Chang, and her smile was very thin. She said company policy prioritized serious buyers. She called him Mr. Chang without a hint of the previous warmth. She said he was welcome to view other listings later. He could return whenever he was ready with a deposit. His mouth opened and then closed. The look he shot me was full of fresh hatred. I understood right there in that lobby that he was a target. He was going to be one of the first names on my list. I signed the papers upstairs in a quiet suite. The suite had a leather sofa and free tea. The hand of the agent shook the entire time. She told me a courier would deliver the keys to any address. I named my current apartment. It was the apartment my wife had rented for us. She copied the address down with a pen that scratched. The sun was low by the time I stepped back into the street. My phone buzzed. It was the aunt of Liani on the family group chat. The birthday banquet for my uncle was starting at 7 o'clock. Liani had already confirmed she would be there. My aunt sent a message with a little smiling emoji. The message said that Mr. Chung Yu had also been invited. He had asked whether Liani would sit at the head table with him. The message deserved a second read. Chung Yu was a wealthy young master. Everyone in the family of Liani had been pushing her toward him for months. He was the man they wanted her to trade me in for. My hand tightened around the phone. The deed for the penthouse went into my pocket. The penthouse cost 7.5 million yuan. The deed sat next to a black card that 3 banks feared. My feet turned in the direction of the taxi rank. Attending that banquet was no longer a question. 3 months after that Tuesday, I would stand under a large chandelier. The chandelier was the size of a small car. I would watch my own wife hurl her banquet invitation at me. She threw it hard. It slapped my collar and tumbled to the marble. She walked past me as if I had never mattered to her at all. She was sure I had begged some connection to sneak inside. She had no clue about the host of the entire evening. He had already emptied 3 phones trying to reach me that morning. The host stepped off his stage the moment she disappeared down the stairs. President Song of the Song Group crossed the floor. He moved in front of 200 guests. He stopped in front of the arrogant cousin of my classmate. He slapped him hard enough to shift the jaw of the man. Then he turned to me and dipped his head. He addressed me as his uncle. 200 faces stopped knowing where to look. I loved a woman who could look at me like garbage. Meanwhile, billionaires bowed to my shadow. To understand this, we have to walk back 3 months. We must go back to a rusted classroom in the south. My phone buzzed once in that classroom. A single number cracked my life clean in 2. My name is Xiao Yang. Until that afternoon, I was the quietest kid in the back row. My parents had vanished from my life when I was small. Nobody in the neighborhood knew where they went. The aunts and uncles who used to visit stopped coming after the 2nd year. I turned 17 and the only relatives who spoke my name sighed. They acted as if they were reminding themselves of a bill. 2,000 yuan a month kept me alive. The money was sent to my card by my wife. I was legally married to her. That part of the story tangled itself before it even started. 2 years earlier, an old promise had been made between our 2 families. That promise put my name and the name of Li Ani on the same paper. She had not asked for it, and neither had I. But she honored the paper. She paid my rent and covered my school fees. Every time she glanced at me, her eyes said what her mouth was too polite to voice. She was at the top of the teaching staff at only 24 years old. She felt she deserved a husband with a spine and a bank balance. That Tuesday, my old phone buzzed during a history lesson. I slipped the phone out under the desk. The message was from my bank, and it was plain and short. A deposit had come in from a private account overseas. My thumb froze halfway to the screen. 9 zeros lined up in a row like soldiers. 1 billion yuan. It was not 1 billion won. It was 1 billion yuan. For a slow second, I was sure the bank had made a mistake. I thought perhaps some scam had learned my number. A second message dropped in a heartbeat later. It was a short note from the sender. The font looked like the handwriting of my mother. She wrote that she was sorry she had been gone so long. She said a man was watching me from a distance. She said this money was the smallest apology she could send. She promised to call one day, but not yet. My mouth went dry. My ears filled with a kind of white noise. The voice of the teacher could not push through. Around me, students scribbled in their notebooks and complained about a test. Nobody noticed the boy in the back row. I was holding a phone under my desk. I was staring at more money than the entire district had earned in a decade. Shu Lingling stood up and screamed. She screamed that someone had stolen the class fund. Lingling was the kind of girl the school had built an altar to. Her father owned a construction firm that was 3 provinces wide. Her uncle sat on the school board. She wore a new watch every semester and made sure everyone counted them. She had been our class monitor since the first day. She kept the class fund envelope in her own drawer because she asked to. No adult had ever told her no. Her scream shot across the classroom like a whip. 12,000 yuan was gone. She waved the empty envelope over her head like a wound. The room went silent. Someone at the front laughed nervously and then swallowed it. My wife was the homeroom teacher and she walked in a beat later. She was still tightening the strap of her satchel. She asked what the noise was about. Lingling did not hesitate for even a breath. Her eyes turned toward the back row and toward me. She spoke loudly. She said only one student in this class had a reason to touch that money. She said only one student lived off handouts. She pointed out that only one boy had been near her desk. Fingers followed her voice. Half the class turned in their seats. Heat climbed into my face before I could remember to keep it blank. My phone was still warm in my pocket. It was glowing with a 9-0 balance. Nobody in that room would have believed it even if I had shouted. Not Lingling, who always spoke with a curl on her lip. Not her boyfriend Jiang Yong. Jiang Yong was already smirking at me from across the aisle. He was waiting for the moment he could join the pile-on. Especially not Liani. The eyes of my wife settled on me with disappointment. She looked tired and already convinced. She asked me to stand. My chair squealed on the floor as I stood up. The whole class heard it. She used the flat professional voice she reserved for slow students. She told me to place my bag on her desk. Obeying was easier than fighting yet. My throat felt like sandpaper, but I let her open the zipper herself. Inside the front pocket sat a small brown envelope. I had picked it up at the bank on my way to school that morning. It contained 50,000 yuan in fresh notes. This was a small withdrawal from a separate account. It was a savings pot my grandmother had left for me before she passed. 50,000 was more money than I had ever held in one place. My plan had been simple. I wanted to buy Liani a small pearl bracelet after class. It was going to be a first gift. I wanted it to be something normal. Liani lifted the envelope out with 2 fingers. She stared at it the way a judge stares at a signed confession. Ling Ling squealed with delight. She told the whole class this was a coward move. She said she had expected this. She told them my kind never learned. She wanted the police. She wanted my expulsion from the school. She wanted me marched out through the front gate for everyone to watch. Once I opened my mouth to explain, my words came out flat and almost pleading. I told my wife the money was mine. I said it was from an old account. I told her the slip was in my bag. I said she could see the withdrawal slip. I only needed 60 seconds. She did not give me the 60 seconds. She did not even lift her eyes. Her voice pulled tight as she told me I had shamed the classroom. She said she wanted me out of the building until the police arrived. The word police cracked something inside my chest, but my face stayed still. The message from my mother was still glowing in my pocket. I had 1 billion yuan. I had a weapon that nobody at this school could imagine. Liani opened the classroom door herself and pointed me through it. I picked up my bag. My cheeks burned as I walked out. Ling Ling gave me a small mocking wave as I passed her seat. Jiang Yang laughed low in his throat. The corridor was empty. The door closed behind me with a soft and awful click. I stood alone in the hallway as the silence grew. My life had changed forever. For a long moment, my hand stayed around the strap of my bag. Somewhere above me, a bell would ring in 10 minutes. Every classroom in this wing would soon empty into this corridor. Students would see me standing there like a thief on trial. I decided not to be there when it rang. That felt like the first real decision I had made in a long time. The withdrawal slip was still tucked in the side pocket of my bag. It could have saved my reputation. My wife had not asked to see the slip. She had not even wanted to see it. That was the part that dug into me. It was not that Ling Ling had lied. Snakes do that. The woman who slept 2 rooms away from me heard the accusation. She believed it before I even finished breathing. Down at street level, my legs carried me to a convenience store window. My own reflection caught me by surprise. I saw the same cheap uniform and the same haircut. My landlady had trimmed it with kitchen scissors. I had the same tired eyes. However, the phone in my pocket now weighed differently. Something in the reflection had shifted a fraction. A decision waited in front of me. I could take the 1 billion and vanish. I could buy a plane ticket and change my name. I could start again somewhere warm. No one would remember the poor boy walked out of class by his wife. Alternatively, I could stay. I would let the people who ignored me for years finally learn who I was. My grandmother used to mutter a certain saying when she thought she was alone. She spoke about the measure of a man's spine. She said a man's spine is measured not by how tall he stands when rich. Instead, it is measured by whether he stands at all when poor. My spine had never fully straightened. That was the truth of my life. Everything changed when the weight in my pocket became significant. Stepping back from the window, my legs were steadier than my thoughts. The phone map showed the fanciest real estate office in the district. It was 6 blocks east, above a coffee chain. My feet turned that way on their own. The office was all glass and pale wood. It was designed to make outsiders feel uncomfortable immediately. A woman at the front desk looked up from her nails briefly. She priced me at a glance. She saw cheap shoes, a school bag, and a uniform. Then, she went back to her nails. The lobby had a display board with property listings in neat rows. My eyes drifted to the top listing. It was a penthouse in the riverfront tower. The unit had 3 floors, a private lift, and a direct river view. The price was 7.5 million yuan. A small tag stated it was for cash buyers only. The seller wanted to close the deal within 1 week. I told the receptionist I was interested in the riverfront listing. She did not look up. She told me to wait in the corner. She said someone would help me when they were free. The corner chair was cold. A young man in a beige coat leaned back on a sofa. He had his arm around a girl in a fur collar. His laughter was loud on purpose. Every other sentence was about that riverfront listing. He wanted the girl to hear him bidding. He looked like the kind of man who bought love in installments. He probably called it romance. A minute passed before he noticed me. His eyes crawled over my uniform. He laughed at something the girl had not said. He asked the receptionist if the office allowed street kids inside for the air conditioning. The receptionist smiled a polite and apologetic smile. She did not smile at me. She smiled at him. An agent came out at last. She was a tall woman with a headset around her neck. She walked straight past me to the man in the beige coat. She shook his hand and called him Mr. Joe Chang. She asked about the deposit. Joe Chang leaned back and spoke loudly. He said the price of $7.5 million felt steep for the location. He was sure the seller would lower the price. He expected the office to find him a discount. He seemed sure of many things a truly rich man never says aloud. The agent's face tightened for a heartbeat. Then, it smoothed. She told him she would speak to the seller. The girl on his arm rolled her eyes. Rising from my chair, my knees felt light. The receptionist glanced up at last. She spoke in a voice used for lost children. She asked if I was lost or if a parent was nearby. I gave her my answer. I told her I wanted the riverfront penthouse. I would pay the full price in cash today. The lobby seemed to swallow the words for a second. Joe Chang laughed first. It was a short and startled bark. He followed it with a longer and meaner laugh. He told his girlfriend the kid was worth watching. He promised the show would be over in 3 minutes. He asked the receptionist to keep the poor thing entertained. The agent with the headset walked over to me slowly. She approached like I was a small dog that might bite. She asked if I understood how much money I had named. She asked if I knew what that amount looked like. Her smile was the kind adults wear when they plan to laugh at someone later. I took the black card from my school jacket. It was a private card. My mother's message had told me to expect it. It arrived that morning in a plain envelope with no stamp. Someone slipped it under my dorm door before dawn. Using it this fast was not the plan. I placed it face down on the counter and slid it across. She flipped the card over. Her smile locked and her lips went pale. Her fingers shook once before she caught them. The agent recognized the card color. It was the color of the metal that mattered. Only 3 banks in the city issued that kind of card. All 3 required a minimum deposit of 100 million yuan. Her eyes rose from the card to my uniform. Then, her whole face rearranged itself. Joe Chang had not stopped smirking. He called across the lobby to ask about the delay. He told the agent to give the kid a plastic model of the building. He wanted me to play Billionaire. The agent did not answer him. She stared at me like I was something she had never seen before. In a very careful voice, she asked to move upstairs. She asked if we could finish in a private suite. She used a new word for me. She called me sir. Joe Chang's smirk died then. His face did a small and mean twitch. He realized the joke had moved without his permission. I told her that upstairs would be fine. However, the deal needed to close within 1 hour. A birthday banquet waited for me that evening. I did not want paperwork hanging over my night. Her earring bounced from the speed of her nod. Joe Chang shot up from his seat. His voice climbed toward a shout. He told the receptionist he was in the office first. He claimed he was discussing that exact unit. He said his family would be displeased if it went to a school kid. The girl on his arm pulled her hand back. She stepped 1 clear step behind him. She had already read the situation. Her handbag became a shield. The agent turned back to Joe Chang. Her smile was very thin. She told him that company policy prioritized serious buyers. She called him Mr. Chang without any of her previous warmth. She suggested he view other listings later. His mouth opened and then closed. He shot me a look full of fresh hatred. I understood right then that he was on my list. He would be one of the first names. We went upstairs to a quiet suite with a leather sofa. I signed the papers while the agent's hand shook. She told me a courier would deliver the keys to any address. I gave her the address of my apartment. That was the apartment my wife had rented for us. The agent copied the address with a scratching pen. By the time I stepped back outside, the sun was low. My phone buzzed with a group chat message. It was from the aunt of my wife, Liani. The birthday banquet for my uncle started at 7. Liani confirmed she would be there. My aunt reminded the group that Mr. Chung Yu was also invited. She said he asked if Liani would sit at the head table. The message deserved a second review. Chung Yu was a wealthy young master. The family had pushed Liani toward him for months. They wanted her to trade me in for him. My hand tightened around the phone. The deed for the 7.5 million yuan penthouse was secure. It sat next to the black card 3 banks feared. I turned toward the taxi rank. Attending that banquet was no longer a question. Manager Lee called me the next afternoon. His voice had an odd note. He politely asked if I could visit the Golden Phoenix. He said something small had come up. He preferred not to discuss it over the phone. In his world, small rarely meant small. The Rolls-Royce sat under the plane tree for the 4th day. The school had still not noticed the car. However, my aunt had noticed something else. She had called Liani twice in 24 hours. Both calls were about the banquet and the empty seat next to Chung Yu. That seat was empty because Liani rode home with me. My aunt did not let insults land without an answer. Her answer was slow, but it was coming. I rode to the Golden Phoenix that evening. My phone lit up with a message from my aunt. She and Chung Yu were meeting for dinner at the Golden Phoenix. They were using the private room upstairs. She asked me to ensure the reservation went through. She used a syrupy tone in her text. She said she heard certain young masters had connections with the house. She was sure I would want to help the family. I reviewed the text twice. Her plan was now clear. She learned enough from the banquet to know Manager Lee bowed to me. However, she did not know what that bow meant. She thought it was a small favor. She wanted to take that favor for herself. She planned to sit at my table with Chung Yu. She wanted to prove the honor did not belong to me. Answering her would have ruined the fun. Manager Lee met me at the private lift. His face was careful as he held in a furious laugh. We walked through the marble corridor. He stopped outside the door of the private room. He told me the honored aunt had arrived 20 minutes early. She insisted the room was booked in her name. Mr. Chung Yu was already inside with her. They had ordered a great deal. The bill was currently just over 98,000 yuan. Reaching for the door handle would have been quick. Instead, I paused. Manager Lee waited without speaking. One version of the evening was simple. I could throw the door open and sit down. I could enjoy their reactions in real time. However, a slower version would land harder. The slower version won. I requested the house to serve them fully. They were to eat their meal without interruption. Manager Lee was to inform me only when they called for the bill. Their evening was to be perfect. Every glass and every course would be provided. Manager Lee's mouth twitched at the corner. He bowed and disappeared into a side room. Waiting in a quiet parlor down the corridor took 1 hour. A pot of tea came and went. My phone lit up with a message from Liani. This was her first message in 2 days. She had left her office late. Her startup had lost an investor that morning. A rival firm had offered her lead client a better deal. She intended to spend half the night looking at balance sheets. She told me because our fridge was empty. Without asking directly, she requested that I eat at school. She did not want me to wait for her. After reviewing the message, my throat tightened for a different reason than the woman behind the wall. She had built her startup alone in the evenings after her classes. She had never asked me for money. She had never even told me the numbers. All I knew was that she came home each night with new lines at the corners of her eyes. Manager Lee came for me at last. He noted that the woman had called for the bill. The corridor to the private room was very quiet. My steps sounded like they belonged to someone else. Manager Lee opened the door for me and stood back. My aunt was mid-sentence with her wine glass halfway to her lips. Chung Yu had one arm along the back of a chair that should have been empty. The table was a battlefield of crystal plates and shark fin soup. A steamed fish and 3 empty wine bottles sat between them. The bill was on a silver tray at the elbow of my aunt. She had the tray in her hand. When she saw me, her hand hovered. Chung Yu turned toward me. His face went through several shifts. He showed surprise before regaining his composure and wearing a smooth mask. I remarked that the two of them looked well fed. I took the chair at the head of the table. I did not wait for anyone to offer it. Manager Lee had said the meal cost over 90,000. My aunt had chosen a rare vintage from the cellar. I offered my compliments to her taste. Her mouth opened. In a sweet voice, she began to explain the situation. She claimed that she had booked the room. She called the meal a small family matter. She stated that she did not need help settling the bill. I cut her off by slipping the black card out of my pocket. I held it out to Manager Lee without turning my head. I told him to charge the whole meal to my personal account. The aunt and Mr. Chung had been my guests for the evening. It was the least I could do to welcome them properly. Chung Yu's jaw locked so hard that I heard his teeth meet. My aunt's face changed color slowly and carefully. She turned red, then white, and then a strange papery gray. She began to say she could not possibly accept the offer. Manager Lee took the card from my fingers with an exact bow. His precision silenced her. He left the room in 3 steps. Chung Yu recovered first. He tried a small laugh and said the gesture was not necessary. He claimed he was more than able to cover the bill himself. He reached into his jacket for his wallet. Manager Lee returned before the hand of Chung Yu cleared his pocket. He informed us that the bill was already settled. Furthermore, the standing account of the young master qualified for a return. This amount was applied as a house credit. Manager Lee asked if there was anything else the young master required. The next word would decide how far this went. The eyes of my aunt were on my face. She was still hunting for the small crack of shame she had counted on for years. I told Manager Lee that nothing else was needed. However, I asked him to escort my guests to the lift when they were ready. I noted that my aunt had a delicate sense of the stairs at night. She made a small sound like a swallowed cough. Chung Yu went a shade paler under his tan. Neither of them said a word as I stood. I took my jacket and walked out of the room. The door closed behind me. In the corridor, Manager Lee fell in beside me. He mentioned one other matter in his softest voice. We had discussed a certain investment firm. The current owner was ready to sell quietly. The sale could happen tomorrow if I wished. The paperwork could be handled through his office. On his own initiative, he had obtained a copy of the active client list. The startup belonging to Lee Ani was on that list. It was the second largest client. Currently, the company faced the withdrawal of a promised investment. I turned to face him in that quiet marble hallway. My voice came out steady. I told him to buy the firm at full price with no haggling. The current management would remain in place for evaluation in the morning. The promised investment for the startup was to be honored immediately. I requested an anonymous transfer. Under no circumstances was my name to be attached. Manager Lee bowed. He said he had already anticipated the request in outline. The paperwork would be ready by 10. My chest ached a little as we walked to the lift. My wife was in a small office across the city. She held her head in her hands over the loss of an investor. Soon, she would hear that they had reconsidered. She would never know why. That was the deal I had made with myself. She had to keep hating me a little longer. Back at the apartment, she was already asleep on the couch when I arrived. A folder of papers was open on the coffee table. A pen had rolled onto the floor. Her cheek was pressed against a printout of a spreadsheet. Her mascara had run a little at the corners. She looked younger while she was sleeping. Draping her coat over her shoulders felt like the smallest thing I could do. She stirred but did not wake. Morning brought a phone call at 7 from her. She never called before 8. Her voice was breathless and confused in a way I had not heard in months. She told me the investment firm had reversed its decision overnight. The full promised amount had already landed in her company account. A short note was attached from a Mr. Shu, a senior partner. He said the new ownership believed in her project. They looked forward to a long partnership. She asked why I sounded so calm. I told her it was because she deserved it. That was all I could say. She was quiet for a moment. Then she mentioned coming home for dinner that evening if the day allowed. Then she hung up the phone. That was the first time in half a year she used the word dinner to mean us. School that day felt strange. Ling Ling was still absent. Jiang Yong had returned but sat 2 rows further away. News of the reprimand from Director Shu had spread widely. The younger students who used to whisper about my shoes now went quiet. Word travels fast. The class reunion had been on the calendar for weeks. The dinner was at a modest restaurant on the far edge of the university district. A student named Wu Hao had organized the event. Wu Hao was the cousin of Ling Ling. He was loud and wealthy in a way that talked louder than it paid. He often mentioned the business connections of his father. He had booked a private room at a place called the Peony Garden. Every classmate on our chat had been pressured into confirming. My presence was expected. Liani would also attend as our homeroom teacher for the opening toast. The peony garden was smaller than the Golden Phoenix. It had brown paper lanterns and plastic chairs at the front. Upstairs, a room had been arranged for 20 people. The other students were already there when I arrived. They were red-faced from the first round of drinks. Wu Hao stood at the head of the table with a wine glass in each hand. He told a long story about a nightclub. He saw me and his story stopped. His eyes performed an ugly and slow tour of my appearance. He asked loudly if I had brought the class fund envelope for old time's sake. A few students laughed. I sat down at the far end of the table and kept my head low. Liani arrived 20 minutes later. Wu Hao was on his feet before her coat was removed. He escorted her to the seat of honor. He poured her a glass of wine and settled his elbow onto her chair. He showed the same assumption of ownership I had seen from Chung Yu. Liani wore a tight professional smile and moved her chair slightly. Her eyes found me at the far end. She lifted her wine glass a tiny fraction and looked away. Wu Hao raised a toast that lasted for 4 minutes. Half of the speech was about himself. He named 3 companies his father supposedly did business with. He also claimed to co-own a nightclub. He turned his glass toward Liani twice. Both times, she only pretended to drink. The evening continued until Wu Hao ordered 3 more bottles of expensive wine. He waved a stack of red notes at the waiter and told him to keep them coming. The waiter was a nervous man in his 50s. The waiter stammered that the cellar had only 2 bottles of that vintage left. The face of Wu Hao darkened. He rose from his seat while weaving a little. He told the waiter that the restaurant should treat a real customer better. He said he was going to have a word with the manager. 10 minutes later, he came back with a bottle in each hand. 4 men followed him into the room. They were not staff members. The 4 men had thick necks and wore cheap jackets. Tattoos were visible on their sleeves. They were local muscle that a restaurant sometimes rents by the night. The whole room went silent. The lead thug had a shaved head and a scar across his left brow. He set a heavy hand on the shoulder of Wu Hao. In a slow voice, he asked which young master had been shouting at his brother. The grin of Wu Hao died. He tried to explain quickly that he was a paying customer. He claimed he had been polite and the waiter had misunderstood. The lead thug shook his head slowly. He said the waiter downstairs was his younger brother. He claimed his brother had gone home crying because a rich boy threw wine in his face. He said he had come only to talk. 100,000 yuan would settle the matter. The money had to be cash and paid tonight. Otherwise, the face of Wu Hao would need a doctor. Wu Hao turned the color of paper. He looked around the room and his eyes landed on me. His jaw worked. He turned to the thug and spoke in a suddenly loud voice. He said that if there was a problem, the whole room would solve it together. He waved his hand at all 20 of us. He claimed to be a man of the people whose friends would stand with him. Half the students shrank in their chairs. 2 girls started crying. 1 boy tried to slip out but was pushed back into the room. Liani rose to her feet. Her voice was steady. She told the men that she was the homeroom teacher. She said she would speak with the management personally. She stated that nobody in the room would be harmed. The lead thug looked at her. He told her to sit back down and drink her wine. She did not sit down. I rose slowly from my chair at the far end of the table. My legs felt very steady. Every eye turned to me. The mouth of Wu Hao twisted. He told the thug that I was the class charity case. He called me the only boy without a family. He suggested they search my pockets for money first. A soft, ugly laugh rolled around the room. Even in that moment, with Muscle standing 3 meters away, half the class laughed. Old habits ran deep. Walking around the table, I did not look at Wu Hao. My path took me straight to the primary thug. I stopped directly in front of him. I was close enough for him to smell the mint on my breath. My voice came out low. I told him the mistake tonight had been Wu Hao's. Wu Hao was drunk and had insulted the man's brother. I conceded that much to the thug. His eyes narrowed. He did not know what to do with a boy in a school uniform. This boy was speaking to him in a bold way. I turned my back on the room. My voice dropped further so only the leader could hear. I told him that 100,000 was too little. His brother's dignity was worth more. 3 million would settle the matter. I would transfer 3 million tonight into his account. The money would be wired within the hour. In return, his men would apologize to the manager. Then they would walk downstairs and leave the building. The leader would tell his brother that the young rich fool had been humbled. The brother could keep his job. Nobody in this room would ever hear from him again. His breath caught. 3 million was not a number a district gang boss heard in his lifetime. He looked at me, and then at the uniform. Then he looked back at me. In a very quiet voice, he asked who I was. I told him I was nobody at all. I was only a boy who did not enjoy watching his teacher be insulted. He held my eyes for a long second. Then he lifted his chin at his men. All 4 of them turned and walked toward the door. The leader walked at the back. Before he left, he glanced back at Wu Hao. He gave him a small mock salute. This made Wu Hao's face crumble. They were gone. My phone was already out. I made a quiet transfer through the application. 3 million was gone to an account I would forget by morning. The room stayed silent for a full 10 seconds. Then Wu Hao stood up. His face was flushed with wine and shame. He pointed at me across the table. He shouted that I had been playing the tough guy. He claimed I let those men leave without paying for their actions. He said the whole class was in danger because I stood up too slowly. He claimed things would be different if he had faced them down. Half the class nodded along with his words. A girl near Leilani wiped her eyes. In a small, angry voice, she said I had made everything worse. She believed the men might have left if I had stayed in my seat. Leilani stood very still. Her eyes were fixed on my face. She did not defend me. Her mouth opened once and then closed. She reached for her handbag. In her professional voice, she told the class that the evening was over. Everyone was to go home safely. She promised to speak with the school about the incident. Her eyes met mine as she walked past me toward the stairs. There was something new in her expression. It was not the usual tired disappointment. She seemed confused and almost afraid. She did not thank me. She did not touch me. She went down the stairs without looking back. I stood there in that upstairs room. The tables were partially cleared and the wine bottles were still open. My chest felt very hollow. 3 million was gone from my account. Behind me, Wu Hao spoke to the remaining students. He claimed he always knew I was more trouble than I was worth. I walked down those stairs and out into the cold night air. The Rolls-Royce was in a parking lot 2 blocks away. I sat behind the wheel for a long minute. My hands stayed on the steering wheel without turning the key. My phone lit up with a message from Manager Lee. He told me the investment firm paperwork was complete. Ownership had transferred at 10 o'clock as promised. However, there was a small matter to address in the morning. The current general manager of the firm was Manager Wang. Manager Wang had made a habit of harassing a young intern. He used verbal abuse and small physical intimidations. He made requests that no employer had the right to make. 2 other employees confirmed this pattern during discreet inquiries. Manager Lee asked me what I would like him to do. I told him to fire Manager Wang first thing in the morning. He was to be escorted out of the building. Every bonus he was owed was to be withheld. That money would be paid to the intern instead. The intern was to be promoted to acting general manager immediately. She would have full authority and a salary review. She must know the decision came from the top and was final. Manager Lee replied within a minute. He said it would be done at 9 o'clock. I finally started the engine. The car pulled out of the parking lot with expensive quiet. My apartment was 15 minutes away. Leilani was not there when I arrived. She had left a note on the kitchen counter. She had gone to her mother's house for the night. She would be home the next evening. Her note said she wanted to think about a few things. Examining that note took the last of my strength. I sat at the kitchen table and put my head in my hands. 3 million yuan had saved 20 students tonight, yet my own wife could not look at me without confusion. My aunt had eaten my food and glared at me. My cousin's crowd blamed me for surviving the ordeal. Somewhere in the city, an intern was about to have her morning changed. She would never know the boy who made that anonymous decision. My mother once told me that dramatic irony was the loneliest thing. She said this on the phone during our last conversation. I did not understand the phrase back then. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the note. Understanding finally arrived at last. Morning light came through the kitchen window and fell on the note. It was still on the counter where she had left it. My hand had folded it during the night without me noticing. 10 o'clock brought a phone call from Manager Lee. He said Manager Wang was escorted from the office at 9 o'clock. The intern, Wen Qing, wept quietly for 2 minutes in the room. Then she reviewed a copy of the client files. Manager Lee thought she would do well in her new role. He also mentioned that Liani's startup had already sent an email. She wanted to schedule a personal meeting with the new leadership. She wished to thank them for the reinstated investment. Refusing the meeting would look strange. Accepting it would put my wife in a room with me. She thought I was hiding somewhere in this city. My compromise was cleaner. Manager Lee would represent the firm as a senior advisor. He would tell my wife the owner preferred to stay quiet. He would mention the phrase humble beginnings and mean it. Manager Lee said he would be honored to do so. The morning also brought a school announcement. A job fair would be held that afternoon in the auditorium. Corporate partners of the university were invited to attend. Senior students were expected to be there. 24 firms had booked booths for the event. Attendance was strongly encouraged for those serious about their futures. My future on paper was still a boy with no direction. Attending was what my wife wanted from me 2 months ago. Skipping the event now would only make her angrier. The auditorium was rearranged into a grid of booths. Recruiters stood behind folding tables with stacks of brochures. Students moved in tight groups with resumes in their hands. They tried to look confident as they walked. My printed resume was only 1 page long. My uniform still had an ink stain on the cuff. A familiar voice caught me halfway down the second row. Chung Yu leaned against a booth for a consulting firm. A branded lanyard hung around his neck. The sign behind him said he was a guest representative. He was invited to help evaluate promising candidates. He held a small stack of resumes in his hand. He flipped through them with a slow and bored smile. He saw me, and his smile changed shape. He waved me over to the booth. He told the nearby students he wanted to help a friend. He held out his hand for my resume. His fingers took the paper politely enough. He looked down and reviewed the first few lines. Then he laughed softly to himself. It was as if I had told a bad joke. He held the resume out for the other students to see. He read my casual job at the bookstore aloud. In a light voice, he asked if they were hiring. A ripple of small laughs went through the students. His fingers opened and my resume dropped. It fluttered to the auditorium floor between our shoes. He did not step on the paper. He did not need to do that. He tilted his head and waited for me to kneel. He wanted to see if I would pick it up. A woman's voice cut across the moment. Manager Hu had been walking down the row. She was in her early 40s and wore a navy suit. She worked for a logistics firm. Manager Hu stepped around Chung Yu and bent down. She picked up my resume off the floor. She gently dusted it with the flat of her palm. Then she looked at Chung Yu with deep disapproval. She told him that a resume was the property of the candidate. Dropping it was not the mark of a serious professional. She told him to treat students with proper courtesy. Chung Yu's smile went thin. He began to say she did not know who I was. Manager Hu cut him off with a polite gesture. She said she knew exactly who she was speaking to. She was a manager at a licensed fair. She asked him to cooperate with her work. Then she turned to me. She asked if I had a minute for an interview. Following her felt like the only warm thing to do. Her booth was 6 spots down the row. It had a small table and a single chair. She sat across from me and reviewed my resume properly. She asked me 2 questions about the bookstore job. Then she asked what I read for pleasure. Finally, she asked what I would do with a small budget. I suggested a mobile library for poor neighborhoods. I had never planned to say that out loud. She wrote on a notepad and slid a card toward me. She said her firm usually did not hire young students. However, she would personally hold my information until I was ready. She told me to call her after I graduated. She promised to find me a role at her company. My throat felt thick as I took the card. Nobody had spoken to me that way in years. It had not happened since my grandmother died. Manager Hu leaned back. She looked past me at Chung Yu. He was 3 booths away, pretending not to watch. She said in a low voice that a certain kind of man told you who he was by how he treated a boy. She meant a boy he thought could not hurt him. Manager Hu told me to remember his face carefully. I should also remember her face when the day came that I could pick between them. My promise came out as a small nod. My voice was not steady enough for words. I walked out of that auditorium. My hand held her card the whole way to the parking lot. The afternoon brought a second call from Manager Lee. The song group of the city would hold a large charity banquet. This event was planned for the following evening at the Grand Orchid Hotel. President Song of the song group personally asked the Golden Phoenix to cater a portion of the evening. Manager Lee had spoken to President Song briefly on the phone that morning. Manager Lee spoke in a small and careful voice. President Song had heard my name during the birthday banquet incident from a mutual friend. Ever since that time, the president had been asking for a way to be introduced. Manager Lee added that President Song was one of the largest business partners of my mother's family. Manager Lee said the name of the Zhao Group gently. He acted as if he was worried the name might frighten me. It was the first time Manager Lee had spoken the name aloud in my presence. He did not explain further. However, he was kind enough to remind me that the Song Group did nothing without a purpose. Manager Lee believed that if President Song wished to meet me, the meeting would happen. It was better if the meeting happened in a place where the terms were mine. I told Manager Lee that attending the banquet would be arranged. An invitation arrived at my apartment by courier within the hour. The invitation featured heavy paper and gold embossing. My full name was written in careful calligraphy. A second invitation arrived on identical paper for Lee Ani at the college that same afternoon. Her invitation came from her aunt. According to the small handwritten note, my aunt had arranged for Lee Ani to be introduced to certain persons of quality. Chung Yu had also been invited. Wu Hao had also been invited. At some point in the recent past, the small firm of Wu Hao's father signed a supplier deal. This deal was with the Song Group. Wu Hao was on the guest list as a junior representative of his father's company. My presence was not on any list given to Wu Hao. In short, Wu Hao was going to think of himself as an insider that night. Lee Ani did not come home the evening before the banquet. She stayed at her mother's house again. A single message came to my phone at 11 o'clock. She said she had been invited to a large event the next night. Her aunt said the event required a certain standard of company. Lee Ani said she would be attending the event alone. She hoped that I would understand. She did not say exactly what I should understand. I reviewed her message twice and my chest tightened. Then a small and dark humor climbed up under my ribs. Lee Ani was going to attend the same banquet that had already sent a car to fetch me. Her family told her that I would not be there. In her mind, she was going to be free of me for one evening. The clean thing to do would have been to tell her the truth. Telling Lee Ani the truth would have ended everything. It would have ended the dramatic irony. It was the last chance for her to see me on her own without help. My silence held. The Grand Orchid Hotel rose above the river like a wedding cake. A red carpet had been rolled out from the curb to the door. Photographers stood along the edges of the carpet in a line. Guests arrived in slow black cars and stepped out already smiling. The Rolls-Royce was left at home at the suggestion of Manager Lee. My car for the evening was a plain black sedan sent by the Song Group. A man in a gray suit who did not speak the entire way drove the car. He opened the door for me at the curb and bowed once. Then he closed the door after me. The photographers turned to look at me. Their cameras did not fire. I was in a school uniform on a red carpet at a Song Group charity banquet. The photographers did not know what to make of the boy stepping out of the sedan. Halfway up the carpet, my eyes caught Wu Hao at the top of the steps. He had been given a small clipboard and a lanyard. He was checking guests off a supplementary list at the door. This was the smallest possible role for him. The firm of his father was only a minor supplier at this event. The clipboard was a courtesy. However, it was the closest Wu Hao had ever stood to a Song Group logo. His face was flushed with the importance of his task. He saw me and his mouth twisted into an ugly grin. Wu Hao rose to his full height and stepped in front of the door as I approached. He held the clipboard against his chest like a shield. In a voice loud enough for the guests inside to hear, he told me the event was for invited guests only. He asked with a smirk whether I had wandered in from the bus stop. My invitation was in the inside pocket of my jacket. Reaching for the card would have been easy. However, my hand did not move. Something about his face and the small crowd forming behind me told me it was worth waiting. A pair of high heels clicked up the steps. Lee Ani had stepped out of a taxi at the curb. She was in a simple white dress with her hair pinned back. She held a small silver clutch in her hand. Her invitation card was already out. Her aunt walked one pace behind her. Chung Yu had already climbed out of a different car in a fresh navy suit. He was closing the distance to the elbow of Lee Ani. He had the confidence of a man who had bought his part. Lee Ani found me at the door. Her whole body went still on the top step. Wu Hao lit up with excitement. He turned to her and spoke in a voice designed to carry. He told her a small trespasser had shown up trying to sneak into a proper family evening. Wu Hao hoped she was not embarrassed to see her husband in this state. He said he was considering calling security to remove me before the ceremony. The face of Liani went the color of paper. She walked up the last 2 steps very slowly. Her eyes never left me. Chung Yu wore a satisfied expression he did not bother to hide. As Liani reached me, her voice came out low and shaking. She asked me what I was doing there. She asked if I had followed her. She asked if I had begged a piece of paper from a student to sneak in. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were bright with strong emotion. Attempting to answer would only sound like a lie to her. Her hand went into her silver clutch. She pulled out her own invitation card. She held the card up between us. Her voice cracked. She spoke in front of Wu Hao and Chung Yu and every guest arriving behind them. She said that if I was desperate for a night among people, I could have her invitation. She said she would leave and go home. Liani wanted to spare herself the shame of being seen with a man who embarrassed her. She threw the invitation at me. It slapped my collar. The card tumbled to the marble. She turned and walked back down the steps. Chung Yu tried to follow her. She waved him off without looking. Liani got into the nearest taxi, and it pulled away from the curb. The red carpet went very quiet. Wu Hao recovered first. He laughed once and told the arriving guests that this was exactly what the evening needed. He called it a little theater. He waved his clipboard at me and told me to walk away. He threatened to have security walk me away. Bending down to pick up the invitation of Liani did not take long. I folded it gently and slipped it into my inside pocket. My chest was very still. Every eye at the door was on me. Chung Yu was smirking openly now. He was unbothered by his failure to catch the taxi. He mouthed the word loser at me. I reached into my other pocket. My hand came out with my own invitation card. It featured heavy paper and gold embossing. My name was written in careful calligraphy. The eyes of Wu Hao went to the card. His grin did not change at first. Then his face did the small and stupid math. His mouth opened and closed. The doorman behind him leaned over and saw the invitation. The doorman saw the seal in the corner and immediately stepped forward. He bowed to me. He apologized in soft and trained tones for the delay at the door. The doorman took the card from my hand himself. He offered me his arm to the entrance. The doorman asked whether I would prefer to be announced or to enter quietly. I told him to let me enter quietly. An announcement was unnecessary. He bowed again and turned to Wu Hao. He told Wu Hao to step aside in a much colder voice. Wu Hao stepped aside slowly. His clipboard was still against his chest. His face had lost most of its blood. Chung Yu was no longer smirking. Walking through those doors, my shoes made almost no sound on the marble. The main hall was 3 stories tall. A chandelier the size of a small car hung from the ceiling. Round tables had been arranged around a raised platform. Guests were already seated at half of the tables. They were chatting over champagne. A small string quartet played from a corner. The air smelled of orchids and roasted meat. A staff member met me at the door. My seat had been arranged near the head table. I was 3 chairs from the seat of President Song. My name was on the place card. Manager Lee had seen to it. Sitting down felt strange. Guests at neighboring tables glanced at my school uniform. When they caught sight of the place card, they looked twice. A woman in a silver gown at the next table leaned over. She asked in a warm voice whether I was the Xiaoyang she had heard about all week. My smile in reply was small. Her husband gave me a small and respectful nod. Wu Hao entered the hall 5 minutes later. He was still holding his clipboard and looking pale. The firm of his father had been given a small table near the back. Wu Hao kept looking toward the front. He kept looking at my seat. A tap of a microphone silenced the room. President Song of the Song Group had stepped onto the raised platform. He was a heavy man in his 60s. He had a broad and open face. He spoke with a quiet voice that the room strained to hear. President Song welcomed his guests. He spoke briefly of the charities the evening would support. He thanked his partners. He listed a handful of partners by name. The small firm of the father of Wu Hao was on the list. Wu Hao showed visible pride at the mention. Then President Song paused. He looked down at a small note. He looked up at the room. He said there was one guest of honor tonight. This guest had requested that his name not appear on the printed program. President Song said the history of his group was important. This history with a certain northern family shaped his fortunes over 3 generations. He spoke about the boy in the room. President Song said the boy who bore that family blood was worth more than every deal signed today. His eyes found mine. He stepped down from the platform. The room began to turn. He walked slowly across the marble floor toward my table. Every conversation died. The string quartet stopped playing. My chair scraped as I stood up. President Song stopped in front of me. He inclined his head in a small bow. In a hall like that, it was a thunderclap. President Song spoke in a voice pitched to carry. He said he had waited a long time to greet me. He called me the nephew of the Zhao line. He said the name a second time. No ear in the room could pretend not to hear it. The room made a small collective sound. A sharp intake of breath ran along the tables like wind. At the back of the hall, the clipboard of Wu Hao slipped from his hands. It clattered loudly on the marble. President Song's eyes tracked the sound. He turned. He looked at Wu Hao at the back table. He looked at the small paper place card for Wu Hao. His expression did not change exactly. The atmosphere became much quieter. This silence was worse than a shout. President Song turned to one of his men. He asked in a soft voice if the young man had caused a disturbance earlier. His man consulted an earpiece and confirmed the fact. President Song walked to the back of the hall. He maintained the same slow and deliberate pace. Wu Hao was now on his feet. His face was as white as chalk. He tried to apologize with a small stammer. Wu Hao tried to explain there had been a small misunderstanding. He even tried to invoke the name of his father. President Song did not shout. He did not raise his voice at all. He simply looked at Wu Hao. Suddenly, his open hand cracked across Wu Hao's cheek. The sound in the hall was very loud. Wu Hao's head snapped to the side. He staggered against the table. A woman at the next table gasped in surprise. President Song looked down at the cheek of Wu Hao without any expression. He spoke in the same calm voice as before. He said a supplier was welcome to represent a small firm at Song Group functions. However, certain conditions applied to this welcome. A supplier who insulted an honored guest was no longer welcome. This exclusion applied to the young man and his father. It also applied to their entire firm. President Song turned to another of his men. He asked for all supplier agreements with the company to be terminated by tomorrow evening. This included every existing contract and every pending order. He said the business would be free to seek other partners in the future. He turned back to Wu Hao. He asked security to escort the young man from the hall. 2 men in dark suits materialized at Wu Hao's elbows. They lifted him under the arms and walked him toward the side door. His feet dragged on the marble floor. His mouth was still open, but no sound came out. The hall became very quiet. President Song walked back to my table. He set his hand on my shoulder briefly. He told the room that the interruption was regretted. He announced that the evening program would now proceed. The string quartet started again after a short beat. Guests began to talk cautiously. Half of the tables were still staring at me. The other half stared at the empty chair where Wu Hao had been. I noticed that Chung Yu had slipped out through the same side door. This happened at some point during the slap. President Song leaned toward me at the head table. He said a car would drive me home whenever I wished. There was no need for further public conversation tonight. He promised to call me in the morning. He would then share the message from my mother. Nodding felt like enough of a response. The ride home was quiet and the driver did not speak. The city moved past the window in ribbons of light. Somewhere in another car, my wife was riding home. She did not know her husband was now the acknowledged nephew of a powerful family. She was already at the apartment when I arrived. She paced the living room in her white banquet dress. Her eyes were red from crying. She was on the phone with her aunt and was shouting. She called herself a fool for throwing the invitation. However, she still called me a fool for being at the door. She did not know what happened after she left the hall. In her mind, security had simply dragged me out. She hung up the phone when she saw me. Her arms crossed and her jaw set firmly. She spoke in the exhausted voice of a woman at her limit. She said she had finally made a decision. She told me she could not keep doing this. She could not attend events where her husband embarrassed her. She could not come home to a man without a job. That afternoon, she had met with a representative from the firm that saved her startup. This man was Manager Lee. She said he was the most gracious man she had met all year. He had spoken with kindness and respect. He spoke about her project as though it truly mattered. Her mouth twisted with emotion. She said the owner of that firm knew what she was worth. That man had faith in her without even meeting her. She noted that a stranger had more faith in her than her own husband. Her voice cracked as she spoke those words. Nodding was all my throat could manage. She went into the bedroom and the door closed quietly. I sat on the couch in the dark. My mother's message from the first day was still on my phone. I held the device for a long moment. A new idea took shape. The next morning, I went to a mall on the north side of the city. An electronics store on the third floor sold a specific phone. This model used 2 identity cards and a dual account system. A person could install the same messaging app twice. One could log in with 2 different accounts. This allowed a person to hold 2 identities in one hand. At the counter, a young woman was arguing with the clerk. She claimed her boyfriend promised her a discount on the phone. Her boyfriend was in a different aisle pretending not to know her. The clerk explained that the store did not offer that discount. The young woman raised her voice. Stepping in was not my original plan. However, I paid for her phone at full price and handed her the box. Her boyfriend appeared when he heard my card tap the reader. His face changed several colors. She looked at him and then at the box in her hands. She turned and thanked me without a word to him. The boyfriend tried to demand who I thought I was. His girlfriend cut him off quickly. She told him she was through with the relationship. She walked out of the store with her new phone. My own phone was purchased next. It was the same model with dual accounts. Setting it up in the car took 20 minutes. I used my personal name for the first account. The second account used an anonymous handle for private business. Manager Lee had sent me a business card design earlier. It was for the owner of the investment firm. The card showed a single surname, Mr. Shu. It listed a private line and nothing more. That was the identity my second account would carry. At noon, Lee Ani was in her office. My finger hovered over the second account for a long moment. My message was brief when I finally sent it. I signed the message as Mr. Shu. I thanked her for the time she spent with Manager Lee yesterday. I used the polite tones of a firm owner. The message said the firm believed in her project. I stated that my line was always open. The message was sent and my phone sat in my palm. 3 minutes later, 3 small dots appeared on the screen. She was typing.